What is up? It is a mid-January edition of the Splash Act podcast. We're a couple days removed from the blockbuster James Harden trade, where James Harden got traded to the Nets, along with a lot of other moves. And I haven't quite had the chance to talk about it in depth. And so now I'm joined by multiple time guests of the podcast and basically the most loyal Rockets fan I know. I'm now joined by Jason. How you doing, man?
Hey Matt, it's been a minute. It's been a while. I think last time we were potting was in the summertime, and a lot has changed, and yet a lot of things are still the same. So glad to
Yeah.
check all the news that's been happening recently.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, um, with regards to the big elephant in the room, you're probably the most like a lot of people I knew kind of were attached to the Rockets just because of James Harden, Daryl Morey, even like Yao Ming, right? But you of all my friends that are Rockets fans, you are like a true Rockets fan. So tell me, like, what is your first gut reaction when you see? Because you guys knew the writing was on the wall, but what is your first reaction when you see James Harden is being traded to the Brooklyn Nets?
I mean, I think it was well known that it's gonna come. It was not an if; it was more of a when. I think it was pretty evident just from the first. So to backtrack, right before he got traded, the Rockets lost two straight at home to the Lakers, and it wasn't even close. And
Yeah.
I remember the night before, LeBron just was fully dominant. From tip off to the end of the game, seemed like the Lakers were in complete control. There's nothing the Rockets could have done. The Rockets were in full strength. James Harden, John Wall, Christian Wood, Boogie Cousins, etc. The whole team was healthy and playing, and the Lakers just were dominating. It was like a shellacking. It's kind of like when you play against your big brother and the big brother's just like, no matter what tricks you have up your sleeve, the big brother's always in control. It was the same game where this is probably if LeBron wins MVP, they're going to replay that clip where he shoots the three, turns around and says bet to Dennis Schroeder, and that really was like, okay, something's got to give. Like James Harden's got to be out for a while, or just and then his comments after that. I think what really shook it was inside the locker room. Everyone just was very uncomfortable, right? It was just one of those things where it's an awkwardness in the team, and it's just really there's nothing could really change to reconcile that. And then you find out right after that, I think the next day, that Harden is traded to Brooklyn. So I was more like, okay, interested to see what type of package they would get back. I think really what came down to was whether or not they would trade for immediate help with Ben Simmons, or whether or not they would basically take a full reboot in terms of leveraging another team's future for the haul that they get for James Harden.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, obviously it got incredibly ugly. Like, it's business play on his side where he's trying to force his way out and trying to make it as uncomfortable as possible. But yeah, man, like seeing some of those post-game interviews from everybody, from James Harden to Marcus Cousins to John Wall, it got really uncomfortable, like me just viewing some of the snippets of those interviews. And obviously, they quickly handled it and got a deal done. I'm glad you brought up Ben Simmons, because it seemed as though the main two, I mean, it's well known, the main two offers were coming from the Sixers and the Nets. What were you more on the side of let's get all these young dudes and or picks from the Nets, or were you more of along the lines of let's get someone who we know is an all-star now and can potentially be a top whatever player in the NBA?
Right. So in my mind, obviously, I really want the known commodity versus leveraging potential draft picks, because it really depends on where the draft picks end up, right? If it just becomes Rockets get 4 mid-round draft picks barely in the lottery, maybe outside of the lottery, then it's like, well, it's kind of like getting scratch-off tickets. You're just hoping, like, okay, maybe it's strike. So usually I would contend, you want to get the best player out of the trade. Although I think this is a unique situation with Ben Simmons because he's such a unique player that it's not a very, you can plug this guy in and he works with a lot of variety in terms of the pieces around him. He needs, good shooting. He brings a lot to the defensive end, but again, he's not the guy at the very end of the game that's going to take the last shot. He's going to be the one setting up everyone else. So I think what it really came down to it was just you want Ben Simmons, but you also want picks too, because you want it both ways. Because even though he's on a team-friendly contract, relatively so for his age, and what he already made an All-NBA team. You've got him for maybe another 2 or 3 seasons. You don't know what the future landscape is going to look like for the next 2-3 seasons, right? So I was okay with it, knowing that those were like the final 2 options. What have I liked? The Rockets trading for another centerpiece piece other than either Karis LeVert or Victor Oladipo. Maybe like I was really pushing for if they could somehow find a way to trade for Zion or Brandon Ingram, but it wasn't like the Rockets that was really in consideration among James Harden's top team options in terms of destinations for him, but more of like an alpha type of centerpiece other than Ben Simmons, because I just don't think he's a very easy player to build around.
Yeah, I mean, I think had he not kind of had like a preferred list of destinations and hadn't kind of tanked those final few weeks in H-Town, I do feel as though like Ingram, I guess I say that to say I feel like if he had given off the vibe of I want to win, I'm going to be professional, I'm not, don't need to worry about any locker room issues or whatnot. I feel like New Orleans could have been I said this before on a podcast with someone else. So I thought New Orleans was like a sneaky bidder for James Harden. And in that sense, I do think you could have gotten like a Zion, or not a Zion. I think Ingram, you could have gotten like an Ingram, Lonzo, Bledsoe, I don't know, Kira Lewis. I don't know. The Pelicans have a treasure trove of assets, but and I'm curious what you think about this. It sounded to me like there were a couple of things working against Philadelphia. One was that they were not really willing to part with any picks and or young assets past a certain point. So I heard that once Houston asked for Tyrese Maxey, it was like, nah, we're not going to be able to do it. But I also heard that Tillman Fertitta just didn't want to do with Daryl Morey. I'm curious kind of what your take on that is, because I personally am of the belief that like you just got to go for the best deal. But sometimes, like poor relationships, bad breakups, like they can get in the way.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think Houston was asking for Ben Simmons, Maxey, plus maybe 2 or 3 picks down the line. And I think what it came down to was Philadelphia was saying Ben Simmons plus, was it Thibault and maybe a pick or 2 less than what the Houston Rockets were asking for. So I think they were on the finish line there. It's really kind of on the edges. I think they would have reconciled at something, but I think it is a big play that the owner stepped in and was like, look, we just let go of Daryl Morey. This kind of like, someone left and they're basically just pulling all the resources from him. PR wise, that's just not a great look, especially can you imagine if James Harden goes to the Sixers, ends up getting the championship, you see Daryl Morey and James Harden hoist the trophies, and it's kind of like that meme with the Wolverine where you got the sitting in the bed and you got James Harden on the Rockets with Daryl Morey. I think that does play, and I think personalities do are pretty big in terms of these owners and how these teams are run, because really, who's paying the checks, who's really taking on responsibility of the team, it's going to be end up at the owners level. And let's not forget, these owners are, they're about themselves, right? It's never really an investment in terms of, getting sporting teams, right? It's more of a flex to other people saying, I am of the select 100 or so people who can say I own a team. So I think personalities are a big play in there. And I think I would say, like, if I could break down percentages, I would say it was maybe 30% likely that Harden was going to get traded to the Sixers, maybe plus or minus a couple percentage points, but they were definitely in the contending. But I think the final deal breaker was the owner.
Sure. I'm with you there. Like obviously, there's not a single factor that makes Houston lean one way or the other, but like you said, a combination of a couple things. It probably was just like, you know what, let's just take this Brooklyn deal. And talking about a combination of factors, it seemed to me as though like I don't know how much of the Kyrie potential extended absence played a role in Brooklyn all of a sudden needing kind of having a sense of urgency because like just a couple of weeks ago, everything seemed good, all handy dandy in Brooklyn, right? So that's certainly an interesting component. But I want to talk more about now that the trade's gone through. Indiana and Cleveland were part of the trade, but I don't want to focus too much on them because I think Indiana, it's pretty simple. You swap Oladipo for LeVert. LeVert's out now, but Indiana's, they're a solid team. And then Cleveland, they get a nice young piece in Jared Allen. I want to talk about kind of the three teams that we just talked about: the Nets, the Rockets, and the Sixers, who didn't take the deal or who didn't get a deal done. So let's starting with your Rockets. Like, what is kind of your first reaction with regards to what direction this team is headed in? Are they kind of throwing away the season? Or are they still trying to remain competitive? Because Oladipo's a solid player.
Yeah, I mean, it could really go both ways, and it really depends on how the team looks after a couple more games. Because you got to imagine they're right now 4-7, at the bottom of the Western Conference standings, and their pick is currently top 4 protected. So if they could go either ways, and I think that's good in terms of flexibility. I have to see how the team is moving. I can see them either performing well and maybe they're pushing for some playoff spots, or maybe if they're just floundering and then you can really pawn off a couple pieces, right? PJ Tucker is on expiring, you can pawn that off. Even Victor Oladipo, if he shows some promise, he's on expiring, you can pawn that off for another first round draft pick, hopefully. Even players like Eric Gordon, if he, everyone's looking for good shooting, everyone's looking for secondary creators come playoff time. And this really reminds me, I'm not sure if you remember like the era between the Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady, and the James Harden era, right? Where Rockets actually had a couple of very promising pieces, although it was, again, they didn't really have that superstar foundational, player in their system. They had a bunch of good players like Kevin Martin came through, a young Goran Dragic, a young Kyle Lowry, Luis Scola. And I remember rooting for those teams even more because it was just, they were such a scrappy team where, you were cheering for players that weren't, contending superstars in every game. Was a very like, I really hope they win. Whereas before, James Harden and Chris Paul and even James Harden Westbrook, it was just, you came into every game expecting you'll get the win, right?
Yeah, wow, that was some quite a few name drops, dude. I haven't heard of Scola in years, dude. But yeah, no, I mean,
yeah, you forget a bunch. Rockets had good player development. They always seem to find gems in terms of solid players, but they took a lot of swings in the drafts to find that foundational piece, and luckily they were able to swing that deal for the James Harden, which really sent ripples through the league since.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, there's still a totally blank canvas. The good thing is that they do have the flexibility to truly go either way, because it's not like Gordon is an asset that can still be maneuvered if you want to kind of bottom out. As same deal with Oladipo. But if you want to be competitive, like, it's not like, I mean, I look at the 1-7 on the Rockets, and like, they're all not bad. So like, I'm with you. It could be a potentially scrappy team that maybe contends for like the play-in spot, right? But so I want to move to, it's crazy. We're talking about James Harden this, and we haven't even talked about where he's going, and that's obviously the Brooklyn Nets. As someone who watched a lot of James Harden, I'm curious, like, what do you think of the Nets now with regards to their? I'm just curious to hear about how you feel about the Nets now that they've essentially given up their depth for top end talent.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say this as every single time the Rockets seem to get another big time star like Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook, and maybe some of their depth is lost. It's really just, your ceiling is so much higher because you've got two players that can really just flip an entire game and just basically, in 2K when they go red hot and just basically take over, right? And there's nothing you can do to stop them. Like, that's something I think I will have to learn to realize as a Rockets fan, that there's no player on the team that can just get really hot and single-handedly flip a game for you. I think it's a work in progress. I think the first game that I saw with Harden and Kevin Durant was the game against Orlando, and it was a lot of highlights. Man, it seems like James Harden hasn't missed a step, and which was really interesting because I was thinking, like, it is very hard to readjust to a different team, especially if you spend so long in a different team structure. And to see him just immediately come out and drop a 30-point triple-double, albeit, again, because of the depth, the lack of depth per se, a lot is expected out of him. But I think you need to give it more time because, again, you can't really take the temperature of, oh, this is a title contender against, no offense to Orlando. That's not like a good enough sample size to see how they play. And it would be really interesting to see how they match up against some of the big time teams where their best players are front court players, right? Like, love to see them on a matchup against the Bucks to see, how do they contend with Giannis, or if they have a game scheduled with the Lakers, and what answers they have for Anthony Davis. So it's really going to have to be dependent on what's going to be left over in the buyout market, whether or not, again, I'm not even sure if they can swing another deal, but just to see who can they add to the front court to at least keep them, balanced in terms of the team, right? That's not to say I don't think they're definitely within, the handful of teams that you would say I could see them definitely win a championship. But I need to give it a couple more games just to kind of feel out what that team is like. And also figure out the Kyrie situation. Like, again, you just had one game where you have 2 out of the 3 pieces. It's kind of like if you're watching Avengers, it's like, okay, well, I want to see all the stones in the gauntlet thing, and see, I want to see that. Right? It's already pretty strong with like 2 or 3 stones, but like I want to see all 5 and then see the snap, right? So
yeah,
it's more of a
6 stones, by the way.
Oh, 6 stones, exactly. Right.
Nah, I'm just giving you a tough time, but yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad you brought up the point about teams with good front court players, right? Because that was a thought that I had before. I'm with you. I'm not making any conclusions off of the one game that they played against Orlando. One question immediately when I saw the trade, like you, I thought, okay, my bigger question mark now is on the defensive end, specifically with regards to front court players, right? So I'll just throw this out here, and I'm curious for what you think. I'm not too worried if the Nets and the Clippers play in a 7-game series, but if the Lakers play the Nets, what are you doing? What are you doing to guard AD and LeBron?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's really unfortunate. I think the best defender is going to be KD, and you got to remember, like, we forget he's coming off an Achilles tear.
Yeah.
Right? So to tell him, hey, you're now going to be, the person who's expected to score a lot. Again, you got help from James Harden and Kyrie, but also take on the best player on the opposite side, which, to be honest, based on Kevin Durant's personality, I think this is what he wanted, right?
Sure.
A lot of people say, well, why did he run away from one super team with the Warriors to another super team in Brooklyn? And I think the difference is this is from the inception, it's his team, right? He was the one orchestrating, kind of putting things together. With Golden State, it was, again, the most popular player was not Kevin Durant, it was Steph Curry. I think that does play an impact on, again, these are NBA players. I don't think it should be wrong that they have egos, but again, you want to think about your legacy. You're one of the all-time greats. You want to be remembered, celebrating championships, but celebrating as in, you point to this person saying this was the best player on the team. So maybe I think that was one of the reasons why he wanted to leave Golden State and kind of start his own team, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the interesting things is you don't need a lot of front court depth. Again, if you're thinking about how you play against other big teams and how you defend, LeBron and AD, you don't need you don't need a lot of pieces. You just need one guy, right? I think the game that it is shaped now in the NBA is really just you needed 4 wings and a big, right? Like, not too complicated.
Yeah.
I can attest to this when watching the Rockets go small ball last season, where it was like you got 5 wings and it caused a lot of problems because you were just getting wrecked on the offensive glass, defensive glass, and stuff. So really, I just think the Nets need to get one guy, and it could be a makeshift version of maybe Jeff Green, but you need maybe someone a little bit more solid than that at the 5 position, and it certainly is not DeAndre Jordan.
Yeah.
Shout out to him. Definitely kind of keep getting them checks type of of his career.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you're playing him for 20 minutes and then you're playing another 20 so minutes of Jeff Green. I would like to see a little more front court help, and I don't think this is gonna happen just because the team, just knowing how this GM operates. But honestly, I think Al Horford would be a nice addition to the Nets if he's available on the buyout market. Now, granted, I don't think Presti would just waive him for no reason. I think knowing Presti, he's probably going to try to milk a pick or so. And then once you're trading him, there's no way the Nets can fit that on their payroll unless they give up DeAndre, who is homies with KD and Kyrie. That said, though, I feel like an Al Horford type where it's like you don't need a star in the front court. You just need a dude who can like hold it down a little bit more than DeAndre and Jeff Green. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at a couple of options, and to be honest, I might have to go back to the well of asking to Cleveland, because Cleveland's just got a bunch of front court players and don't know what they're doing with them. It's really unfortunate that they had to put Jared Allen as part of the deal, and of course, if that's the last thing to move to get James Harden, then I would take it. But looking for bigs, looking at expiring, we can package a couple of second round picks or something like that. What's remaining in your very empty treasure chest of future assets. That's what I would look for. But I think the Al Horford's a good option, but I just don't think the contracts
it's not gonna
match up.
No, go ahead.
So I think we'll have to see how it plays out. One of the other reasons to go back to why the deal happened was, if you look at the records, the Nets were not like top of the rankings in terms of standings, right? The record was pretty much 500 when they made the deal. So they have a lot to figure out, but I'm very optimistic that they will figure out, because again, a lot of these teams that end up beating are really defined by your top 2, top 3 players. And I would contend that the Brooklyn Nets, save for maybe the Lakers, have the best top 2 players. Maybe the Clippers, but they're certainly up there.
Yeah. I'm just looking around. I mean, I saw that the Nets were trying to include Shamet in the deal, and that the Houston didn't want Shamet, and he's been pretty bad this year, but I feel like he's a piece that they could maybe move for a little bit of front court help. Granted, you're not going to get like you're not getting any defensive stopper, like an AD stopper, anywhere on the market, especially not if you're giving up Shaman. But I do feel like there's, like you said, there's a little bit of room on the buyout market / potentially one more trade. Like, I guess I say that to say this is probably not the final version of Brooklyn that we're going to see going forward.
Yeah, I mean, like you could look at players like a Paul Millsap, right? He's on expiring. Maybe again, I'm not sure how much the Nuggets are trying to contend, but I think if they're trying to put up Porter up on a position, then maybe Paul Millsap's the odd man out. So there are options out there for them to pick up, and especially if teams are going to try to shed contracts later down the line. Now that playoff seedings is really shaking out, although the extra team could mean that a lot more teams are going to have to like sell themselves as contenders rather than they're just tanking or
sure.
This season's more of a wash.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I'm definitely really excited to see this 3-headed monster in Brooklyn, especially on the offensive end. I can't quite remember a big three that has this much offensive firepower, to be honest. But it'll be exciting to watch for sure. Moving on to the last team that I mentioned, the team that didn't do the deal, and that was the Sixers. How do you think? I'll give you and I don't mean to frame this question in a biased way, but do you think the Sixers are actually better off by not doing the James Harden deal?
No, I think they do need to make the James Harden deal, especially if you're thinking about this season. It's just at the end of the day, imagining a lineup or finishing lineup with Ben Simmons and Embiid, there's just too much weirdness going on to have them coexist. Them single, like if you take them individually, great, fantastic players. It's just when you put them together, things get a bit cramped in terms of, they're very ball dominant. Their play styles are really just not that complementary enough that I think they will succeed. Not to say that I don't think I could see a situation where they win the championship. I think it's just there will be a lot of questions about how does this best fit in, and I think that's going to be a lot of strain and stress on Doc Rivers. And again, like he's a great coach, but again in playoffs, what's his track record? And a lot of the memories still fresh about his collapse in terms of what happened with the Clippers, what happened in his previous teams, with Chris Paul. And then later on with the Kawhi Leonard and Paul George teams, right? So it's yet to be known, but I think if you're saying would they be better with, Ben Simmons and Embiid as their centerpiece versus James Harden and Embiid, you ask 10 people, 10 people are going to say, I'd rather have James Harden and Joel Embiid.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. I wonder, aside from the weirdness that you alluded to, which I certainly agree with, though Daryl Morey did address that a little bit, I do wonder if it'll rub off some type of way that Simmons, where I bet you kind of like you were, I mean, it's like you said, it's no secret. These guys, they can have a little bit of an ego, and not in a bad way, but Ben Simmons believes in himself, right? And I wonder if maybe it's a little alienating when he hears his name dangled in these trade rumors, and he's like, hang on, like, why is Joel the untouchable piece that's not moving? And so I do wonder.
That's another angle. That's another angle that I think is very interesting. I'm actually more recently been interested in understanding the psychology of these sports and how it's very easy to boil down to things as the analytics, where these players are just chess pieces and you're moving them around, and they should behave and interact with teammates in a certain way based on the numbers that they have. But I think there is a bit of a psychological play that, not to just rail on Daryl Morey because he was a fantastic GM, but I think there was one missing piece in terms of how he constructed teams. There was just so much turnover and everyone was constantly in the threat of being traded that I think it really did weigh down on a bunch of players. And I think one of the big reasons where we saw whenever they acquired players and they didn't really perform amazing immediately, or, they would be on short-term things and then leave and then, perform better. I think there is a psychological thing with the way that Daryl Morey constructs his teams that analytically it's all seems like it should fit in. But, in the players' minds, they're thinking about, well, like, how safe is my job? I was recently in trade rumors, or I have no really idea whether or not my future is with the team. I don't really have a lot of loyalty and that I'm wanted here, or more just like I'm not really a person in this whole system and just another clog in the machine. And I think that really affects player performance, right? And it's not one of those things where they can immediately shift their reality, right? It's just something in the back of your mind. You can't really, as much as you want to try to control your thinking and control like I got to be in the here and now, it's going to be lingering in the back of your mind. And as such a intense level of sport where there's a combination of athleticism and precision and finesse and skill, I think it does weigh on the players.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, that was a interesting deep dive from you. But yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with you. Like, that if there was anything you could knock Daryl Morey for, quite frankly, during his tenure in Houston, it was what you just alluded to, which was strictly just looking at kind of the analytics without ever thinking like you said, those external kind of, whether it's kind of psychological or kind of motivational type factors. So that's certainly, I certainly agree with you there. So we'll see if Simmons and Embiid kind of, we'll see how the having Simmons and trade rumors, if that impacts the team, if at all. But one last thing before we wrap up, I just had an idea that popped into mind. I don't know exactly how the money's going to work, but you mentioned like a Paul Millsap, right? And I mentioned Landry Shamet being terrible so far in Brooklyn. And Philadelphia always is looking to surround Simmons and Embiid with shooters. So that made me think, who coached who was decent in Philadelphia, then got traded to the Clippers, and then played well under Doc Rivers that I just mentioned?
Ooh, it's not Jermichael Green. Is Jermichael Green on that team or no?
He's on the Nuggets, but I'm talking Landry Shamet, drafted by the Sixers, traded to the Clippers.
Okay. Yep.
Played well under Doc Rivers, now in Brooklyn, and obviously the Nets are more than happy to move him, right? Is there I'm just floating this out there. Is there a three team deal where Shamet goes to Philly, someone on Philly goes to Denver, and then Millsap goes to Brooklyn?
Yeah, that seems promising. Although I think it's just very interesting to see why would Philadelphia try to trade and help out another contending team.
Yeah.
So you really got to consider, like, it all makes sense. This all works out, but it's, again, the psychology of, like, I don't really want to help a team that I'm
a team in your division.
What I'm thinking exactly. What I'm thinking more is, like, probably you got to look at some of the lower teams in terms of teams that are a bit lower in the standings. So I'm looking at, like, the New York Knicks, of, like, what are some players on that team that maybe could get shipped off, and they have some solid players, like maybe you get a Taj Gibson or something, or like maybe a Nerlens Noel possibly, like that could be pretty useful.
Forgot about Nerlens.
Right, he was in a previous life, he was worth top dollar, but he just kind of bet on himself in the wrong way.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying, look at the Knicks. Look at what are other teams that are in the bottom of the standings. Maybe take a look at the Sacramento Kings. They have a bunch of front court players. Or again, it's still very early. Where
Pistons.
It's out of 70 games. Pistons, yeah, definitely for sure the Pistons. So just kind of see what's out there as more teams fall out of playoff contention and are looking more. It's more of a race to the bottom rather than a race to the top.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I'll definitely be sending you a bunch of fake trades the coming weeks to see how the Nets can improve. But appreciate you coming on, Jason.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Yeah, and obviously we'll talk soon. And to the listeners, thank you for listening. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe on whatever medium you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Once again, thanks for listening.